I was on Mars Station when the message came through. The incoming priority transmission override bypassed every security protocol, forcing itself onto every screen, every comm panel, every neural implant. At first, there was only static. Then the image sharpened, and the whole solar system went still. A child, no older than 10, standing in the center of a cold metallic chamber, small wrists bound in front of them, trembling. A single, glaring light cast a long shadow behind them. Their breathing was shallow, rapid. A Zarkari High Marshal loomed above, reptilian eyes filled with the same detached cruelty their kind always showed to species they deemed inferior. A tribunal of armored figures sat in a semicircle, the insignia of the Zarkari Empire hanging behind them, a grotesque display of authority, rigid and unmoving. The child was human, and they were alone. A monotone voice, likely an AI or a synthetic interpreter, translated the words of the High Marshal. "You stand accused of illegal planetary entry. You are guilty of violating the territorial sovereignty of the Zarkari Empire. The punishment is death." The child whimpered. Their lips moved, but no sound came out. Maybe they were trying to beg. Maybe they were trying to explain. Maybe they were just too afraid to speak. It didn't matter. The tribunal had already decided. The High Marshal raised a hand. A soldier stepped forward, leveling a plasma pistol at the child's forehead. Somewhere on Mars Station, someone screamed. But the broadcast wasn't done. The child's shoulders shook, their body trembling so violently it was painful to watch. A final sob escaped their lips. Then, the trigger was pulled. A bolt of red-hot plasma shot forward, striking just above the child's right eye. The impact sent them sprawling backward, lifeless before they hit the cold metal floor. Smoke curled from the wound, the scent of burned flesh almost tangible through the screen. The tribunal did not move. The High Marshal gave a curt nod, then turned to leave. The screen went black. Silence. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe 5 seconds, maybe a full minute. A hush had fallen over Mars Station, like the entire facility had forgotten how to breathe. I could feel my own pulse hammering in my skull, a dull, rhythmic beat of disbelief and rage. Then, all at once, the solar system exploded. Screens were smashed, fists slammed against metal walls, voices rose in fury. I saw a man drop to his knees, hands clenched into shaking fists, teeth bared in a silent snarl. Somewhere behind me, a woman was sobbing, her voice raw with grief and fury. Others weren't crying, they were shouting, swearing, demanding. The transmission had been sent across every colony, every outpost, every ship in the fleet. Earth had seen it. Luna had seen it. The military had seen it. The Zarkari had made a mistake so colossal, so irreversible, that there was only one possible response: annihilation. Within minutes, the fury of humanity reached a boiling point. There was no debate, no hesitation, only the cold, unshakable certainty that war was inevitable. The Zarkari thought they could kill a human child and continue their empire as if nothing had happened. They thought we would protest, file complaints with their bureaucrats, maybe even send a diplomat to grovel for justice. They had no idea what they had done. On Earth, riots turned into rallies, the streets of every major city filled with millions demanding war. Not revenge. No, revenge was personal. This was something more. This was retribution. This was justice. The people didn't have to convince the government. The Sol Council had already made its decision before the first protests even began. Every available military officer, every fleet admiral, every general, every strategist called to immediate emergency assembly. The message was clear. We end the Zarkari. Entirely. The Mars High Command authorized total war protocols for the first time in human history. The outer colonies, often independent and defiant of Earth's rule, sent their own warships without hesitation. Titan's orbital factories, usually dedicated to trade ships and colony vessels, switched to mass-producing weapons of war overnight. Luna's dockyards opened every shipyard, pushing out battlecruisers at a speed thought impossible. The Terran Dominion's navy, already formidable, transformed into something unstoppable. Fleets that once stood guard over human territories were reorganized into a single invasion force. Dreadnoughts, carriers, destroyers. Ships of all sizes armed to the teeth, mobilized not for battle, but for extinction. We weren't just bringing war to the Zarkari. We were ending them. Their empire spanned hundreds of worlds, 1,000 species under their rule, and yet they had never faced an enemy like humanity. We were younger than them, smaller than them, but we were not weak. We had been underestimated before. Once, long ago, another alien race had tried to subjugate us. They had learned too late that humans do not break, we burn, and we take our enemies with us. The Zarkari would learn the same lesson. As the unyielding vengeance prepared for departure, I stood on the bridge and watched the war machine come to life. The final message from the Sol Council arrived on my personal terminal, a direct order from the highest authority in the Dominion. No negotiations, no half measures, no retreat. The Zarkari Empire ceases to exist. I looked out at the countless ships assembling in the void, their engines flaring as they prepared to make the jump to war. Every pilot, every soldier, every captain shared the same thought. This was not a war for territory or resources. This was the last mistake the Zarkari would ever make. The Zarkari believed us fractured. They thought humanity was a divided species, scattered across too many worlds to ever unify under one cause. They had studied our politics, our history, our infighting. They saw the tensions between Earth and the outer colonies, the disputes over trade, the territorial conflicts in the Proxima sector. What they failed to understand was that humanity could fight itself for centuries. But when faced with an outside threat, we became something else entirely. We became a singular force. The response was instant. Every colony, every station, every ship capable of fighting answered the call. The industrial hubs of Mars and Titan activated emergency wartime protocols, churning out warships and weaponry at speeds that should have been impossible. Even the frontier worlds, far from the Dominion's core territories, pledged their fleets to the cause. We weren't fighting for resources. We weren't fighting for land. We were fighting for the soul of our species. From my position aboard the unyielding Vengeance, I watched as the largest armada in human history formed before my eyes. Dreadnoughts bristling with railguns and plasma cannons, carriers launching entire squadrons of assault craft, stealth cruisers lurking at the edges ready to strike like unseen predators, destroyers and frigates moving in precise formations, their commanders hardened by years of border skirmishes. This was not a fleet. This was an executioner's blade, forged in rage, honed by grief, and sharpened by the unbreakable will of our people. The Zarkari had never seen humanity at war, not truly. They had encountered our patrols, our diplomats, our trading vessels. They had fought the occasional skirmish against our border defenses, testing our resolve with minor engagements, always assuming we would submit to their empire like so many other species had. They had never seen what we were truly capable of. That was about to change. The final strategic briefing was held in the war room of the unyielding Vengeance. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing the Zarkari's outer colonies, their defenses, their fleet movements. Their forces were spread thin, garrisoning hundreds of worlds, their fleets stationed in predictable formations. They had not prepared for a full-scale invasion, because they had never imagined that anyone would dare to challenge them. They did not expect retribution. They expected politics. They expected hesitation. They expected mercy. They would receive none. The war plan was simple. The outer colonies of the Zarkari would be the first to fall, wiped from existence, to send a message. The core worlds would follow, their infrastructure reduced to ash. The homeworld of the Zarkari people, the seat of their empire, would burn last. This was not a war of conquest. There would be no negotiations, no treaties, no survivors. Survivors were either killed or eaten. I watched as the countdown began. 5 minutes until departure. 5 minutes until the Zarkari Empire's final days began. The Zarkari received our message in fire. Xiphos 9 was the first to fall. It was a thriving industrial colony, one of their core supply hubs, a world they had spent centuries building. Its orbital defenses were formidable, its fleets well-armed, its surface covered in sprawling cities and towering factories. It was meant to be untouchable. We destroyed it in less than an hour. The unyielding Vengeance led the assault, its main battery firing the first shot, a kinetic bombardment that tore through the planet's orbital platforms like they were made of paper. The Zarkari's defensive fleet scrambled to respond, but they had no time to react before our second wave arrived. Their ships were powerful, larger than ours, built for prolonged engagements. It didn't matter. We didn't fight fair. Humanity had always been outgunned in past wars. We had learned, adapted, evolved. Our ships were smaller, but they were faster, more precise. Our weapons didn't rely on brute force alone. We had railguns that fired at near-light speeds, missiles that wove through enemy defenses with terrifying efficiency, and plasma weaponry designed to burn through the thickest Zarkari hulls. The battle wasn't a contest. It was a slaughter. Their capital ships exploded in rapid succession, their formations crumbling under the relentless assault. Fighters and bombers tore through their weakened defenses, disabling engines, crippling command vessels before they could even organize a response. The Zarkari's famed battle discipline shattered the moment they realized they weren't dealing with another border skirmish. This was something else. This was extinction. I stood on the bridge, watching as Xiphos 9's surface became a funeral pyre. Their cities were not simply bombed. They were erased. A new experimental weapon, something our scientists had been developing in secret, was finally unleashed. It didn't just destroy, it unmade. A pulse of energy swept across the planet, reducing entire cityscapes to dust in seconds. Skyscrapers crumbled, entire industrial sectors vaporized. Millions of Zarkari civilians vanished before they even understood what was happening. Their distress signals flickered and died, their military transmissions cutting off mid-scream. When the dust settled, Xiphos 9 was nothing more than a dead rock, its surface scarred beyond recognition. A colony that had stood for 500 years was gone in the blink of an eye. The first message from the Zarkari High Command came shortly after. They begged for negotiations. They pleaded for mercy. We gave them our answer. A single transmission was sent back, broadcasted to every Zarkari channel, every relay, every outpost still clinging to hope. A simple, undeniable truth. You have made your choice. Now, there will be nothing left of you. The Zarkari had set the terms of this war when they executed that child. Now we would finish it. The Zarkari tried to surrender. It started with intercepted transmissions from their border worlds, desperate voices pleading for diplomacy, for ceasefires, for anything that might slow the tide of annihilation crashing down upon them. Their fleets, once arrogant and unchallenged, were in full retreat. Their generals, once ruthless conquerors, were now cowards seeking mercy. Their leaders, once so certain of their empire's invincibility, were sending emissaries into human space, hoping, praying that we would listen. We did not. The war was over before it had truly begun. Humanity did not fight for dominance or resources. We did not seek territory or control. There was no political agenda, no conquest, no future where the Zarkari would be allowed to exist in any capacity. We fought for one thing: erasure. One by one, their core worlds burned. Their fleets, scattered and broken, tried to regroup, but there was nowhere left to run. Every system they had claimed, every stronghold they had built, fell before us. The colonies that had once been their pride, centuries, old bastions of their empire, were reduced to empty, silent husks. Some planets were taken swiftly, their defenses obliterated before they could mount a response. Others suffered slower fates. We cut off their supply chains, blockaded their transport routes, and watched as their once mighty infrastructure collapsed under its own weight. The Zarkari still did not understand. Even as their worlds fell, even as their fleets were torn apart, they believed there was a way out. That if they begged hard enough, if they sacrificed their own leaders, if they groveled low enough, we might stay our hand. They did not realize that there were no negotiations. There would be no treaties, no reparations, no survivors. The unyielding vengeance led the charge into their final strongholds. I watched as their last great fleet assembled over Zarkari Prime, their homeworld. It was a desperate last stand. Every ship they had left, every war vessel, every civilian transport armed with whatever they could muster. They had finally understood the truth. It was too late. The battle lasted less than an hour. Their defenses shattered like brittle glass. Their flagship, a massive battle cruiser meant to be the unbreakable shield of their empire, was torn apart in a cascade of fire and debris. Their escape vessels were hunted down before they could flee. Their final distress calls were ignored. And then it was done. The Zarkari no longer had a fleet, no longer had an empire. Only one thing remained: their homeworld, the beating heart of their civilization, the place where their empire had begun, the last refuge of their kind. It would burn next. Zarkari Prime hung in the void before us, its surface a tapestry of sprawling cities, towering citadels, and the gleaming palaces of their ruling elite. This was the heart of their empire, the world from which they had ruled for thousands of years, the seat of their power. And now it would be their tomb. The fleet of the Terran Dominion surrounded the planet, an unbroken wall of warships stretching across the darkness. Every orbital defense, every last ship that could have mounted resistance had already been destroyed. There was no escape, no one left to call for help. The Zarkari had finally run out of time. A final message came from the planet. It was not a plea, it was not a negotiation. It was surrender. The High Chancellor of the Zarkari Empire, once a figure of supreme authority, now a broken shell of a ruler, appeared on our screens. His scaled face was drawn with exhaustion, his eyes dull with the weight of impending doom. Behind him others stood, politicians, generals, nobles, every figure of power that had once ordered the subjugation of entire species, now reduced to frightened animals awaiting judgment. "We submit," the Chancellor said, voice shaking. "The Zarkari Empire is no more. His voice caught, as if the words burned his throat. "We beg for mercy." Mercy. For centuries, the Zarkari had enslaved weaker species. They had burned entire worlds for profit. They had butchered those who could not resist. They had executed a human child to remind the galaxy of their dominance. Now, when the fire of justice was upon them, they asked for mercy. I gave the order. The bombardment began with a single shot from the unyielding vengeance. A railgun round the size of a skyscraper, traveling at near light speed. It tore through the Chancellor's palace, reducing it to a crater of molten slag. The transmission cut out mid-scream. Then, the true annihilation began. Thousands of kinetic warheads rained down from orbit, impacting with the force of extinction. Cities shattered beneath their fury, buildings crumbling into dust, streets turning into oceans of fire. Plasma beams carved through the planet's surface, melting continents, boiling oceans, turning once thriving landscapes into blackened wastelands. The Zarkari tried to flee, but there was nowhere left to run. Spaceports were targeted first, erasing any hope of escape. The underground bunkers where the elite had hidden themselves were torn open, their occupants incinerated without ceremony. The air itself turned to poison, choking out the last remnants of life. We did not stop. Not until the planet itself was lifeless. Not until every city, every monument, every trace of the Zarkari's existence had been wiped away. And then, at last, there was silence. Zarkari Prime was dead. The Empire was no more. Only one thing remained: the message we would send to the rest of the galaxy. The war was over. Not in the way wars typically ended. Not with treaties, not with negotiations, not with some fragile ceasefire that would crumble in a decade. No, this war ended in the purest way possible, with fire, with finality. The Zarkari Empire no longer existed. Where once their fleets had patrolled the stars, there was only debris. Where once their banners had flown over conquered worlds, there was only silence. Their colonies were dead, their homeworld reduced to little more than a molten wasteland adrift in the void. The species that had ruled for millennia was extinct, and the galaxy watched in horror. The transmission had been sent to every known civilization, every empire, every coalition, every scattered colony and independent world. They had all seen what we had done. They had all witnessed the execution of the Zarkari. We had not hidden it. We had made it clear. The final message from the Soul Council was simple, broadcasted on every open channel, its meaning undeniable. Let this stand as the only warning humanity will ever give. We do not seek conquest. We do not seek dominion. But if you harm our own, if you dare spill the blood of a single human soul, then you will cease to exist. There will be no war, no negotiations, no mercy, only extinction. And with that, the Dominion's fleets turned away from the ruined remains of the Zarkari's territory and returned home. There was no celebration, no parades, no declarations of victory. This had never been about victory. It had been about justice. I stood on the bridge of the unyielding vengeance as we made our way back to Seoul, watching the quiet hum of the fleet around us. Thousands of ships, each one filled with soldiers who had seen what true retribution looked like. None of us spoke. We had done what had to be done. Some would call us monsters. Some would claim we had gone too far, that we had become something worse than the Zarkari. But those people had not seen what I had seen. They had not witnessed the execution of a child as a spectacle. They had not heard the laughter of the Zarkari as they justified it, as they treated human life as something beneath consideration. Perhaps we had become monsters. Perhaps that was the cost of survival. But one truth remained. Never again would humanity be threatened. Never again would some alien empire look at us and see prey. Never again would a single human child be taken from us without consequence. We had sent our message in blood and fire, and the galaxy had listened. For the first time in history, humanity was feared. And fear, I realized, was the only language the universe truly understood.